In this story, we'll talk about a group of gangsters that were involved in some serious crimes. They would end up being sentenced to over 2,000 years in prison for the crimes committed by the men associated with this crew. Let's start in 1958, when Temple No. 25 became the first Nation of Islam mosque to open in Newark, New Jersey. In the time period of this discussion, America was struggling with the Vietnam War and the remnants of it. African Americans served and died in the war and came back to a country that didn't want them to have the freedom or the right to vote. Manufacturing plants were closing down and we were going through the pain of unemployment and inflation. At the same time, the women's suffrage movement was in full effect. In the mid-1960s, some members of the Nation of Islam would have a difference in view and made a decision to split. They would go on in a different direction under the name New World of Islam. During court trials and testimony of some of those who decided to cooperate, the prosecution insisted that one of the major differences is that the nation believed that Elijah Muhammad was a messenger of God, while some members of the New World professed that Elijah was not just a messenger, but God himself. This was just one of the major differences that caused the deep divide in the structure and mission of the two groups. As with any organization, you need money. Most organizations this size would resort to selling drugs, but the New World had different plans. The way they acquired their funding is the driving force that made them more than just a religious organization. They were a group of strong, smart, and healthy men with the will to put in work. So they became gangsters with the headquarters located in Newark, New Jersey, at Temple 25. One of those members was a man named Albert Dickens. Albert and his team committed a bank robbery in 1966. During that robbery, a police officer was shot and severely injured. Albert was arrested and sent to Rahway State Prison for his crimes. During his stay, he went to work. He began recruiting young men who was wanting to belong to something bigger than themselves. It was an attractive lifestyle. The discipline of watching what you eat, regular exercise, and other aspects that made you feel different and sometimes superior to other people in other organized gangs. James Scott Jr. was also associated. At the time, he was a boxer serving time in Rahway. He was a contender in the Boxing Association's lightweight division while behind bars. Other boxers would come into prison to fight him. He was serving time because his car was used in a robbery where a homicide was committed. Those that made a decision to cooperate with law enforcement would describe to prosecutors how this all started for them. Some said while in prison at Rahway, Albert and his crew would approach them. They were then indoctrinated into something greater than themselves. It was more of a lifestyle and a way to look at society and the situation they were in. From the outside looking in, it's the same tactics used by every organization and gang that recruited young men and set them on a path of self-destruction. When you intentionally recruit criminals, the outcome can only be one of two things. The cooperators would describe the bank robberies and gun violence training they received in basements and other locations throughout New Jersey. After one of the bank robberies was committed by the New World, the 33rd mayor of Newark, Hugh Adonisio, ordered a raid on Temple 25. A whole crew of police officers infiltrated the temple and destroyed everything during the raid. They caused the institutionalized harassment of African Americans to move up another notch by a corrupt mayor. A few years after the raid, the mayor would be found guilty of conspiracy and extortion in July 1970 and sentenced to 10 years in prison. At his trial, he was linked to organized crime with the Boyardos, who turned out to serve as an inspiration for HBO's TV show, The Sopranos. Members would participate in murder, robberies, and other documented crimes in furtherance of the organization. Anytime you hear those words, you can bet RICO is somewhere around the corner. As there are too many crimes to mention, we'll just focus on the following few. Upon the assassination of John F. Kennedy in 1963, Lyndon Johnson took over as president. In the week of February 15, 1965, Malcolm X's house was set on fire. Less than 10 days later, he was assassinated. Talmadge Hare, Norman 3X Butler, and Thomas 15X Johnson were charged with the crime and sentenced to life in prison. It's understood that the assassins were an organized group with roots from Temple 25. The 15th Amendment prohibited states from denying male citizens the right to vote. August 6th, the same year, President Lyndon Johnson signed the Voting Rights Bill. It was created to secure the rights to vote for racial minorities. At 4 p.m., September 4th, 1973, a man became a victim of a homicide. He was in his driveway getting out of his car when two men ran up on him and discharged one round above his left eye. James Shabazz was 52 years old when he lost his life at his home in Newark, New Jersey. He shared that home with his wife and 13 children. James wasn't just anybody. He met Elijah Muhammad in the 1940s when they were incarcerated together. That's when Elijah introduced him to the nation. At the time of his death, he was a leader and minister of Temple 25 and was suspected of playing a part in the death of Malcolm X. Albert Dickens was believed to be the orchestrator in his death, but the government was unable to prove it. Members of the New World would later be convicted of the homicide. The next month, on October 18, 1973, the decapitated bodies of black Muslims was discovered in a park 4 miles away from the home of James. It was obvious that no outside group would dare commit the crimes in this story. Like every other organization, the threat always comes from the inside. In 1976, a police officer by the name of Alfred was serving as a security guard at the First Federal Savings Bank. Two men in ski masks ran into the bank to commit a robbery. During the robbery, Alfred lost his life. A 17-year-old named Mark Jackson and a 20-year-old named Walter Barry were charged with the robbery and the homicide of Alfred. They were both members of the New World. When they were arrested, law enforcement found the murder weapon and the officer's service weapon. For this, on June 30th, 1976, they were sentenced to life in prison. They were later paroled in the late 1990s. In November 1980, a police officer named John Gottfried went to a bank on his lunch break to cash a check. Two armed men stormed in and told everyone to get down on the floor. They got what they came for and was leaving when John opened fire, hitting one of the robbers in the leg. They returned fire, seriously injuring John. As John laid on his back, they ran up on him, took his service weapon, and unloaded 3 more times, ending his life. 2 days later, they were arrested. The 16-year-old and a 27-year-old turned out to be members of the New World. 3 days after the incident, a 42-year-old so-called leader was also arrested and charged with the murder. It's understood that Albert and his team recruited many young men while serving time in prison. It's believed that he controlled many of the decisions made on the streets while behind bars. With all the bank robberies, misguided youths, homicides, high-speed car chases, and everything else that goes along with organized crime, on December 19, 1981, an all-white jury sentenced 17 members of the New World of Islam. Each member received 25 years in prison. Be sure to follow Gully TV on the Dribble podcast, available on all streaming sites, and visit the website therealdribble.com to pick up an autographed copy of Something I've Been Through, a Gully TV memoir predicated on his relationships with some of America's most notorious black gangsters and drug lords. This is Alan Evans from Big City Crime TV. Until next time, y'all keep it gully. Peace.